Welcome to the Art of Living Free series with Anthony Silard, brought to you by theartoflivingfree.org. Today, Dr. Silard explores leading during the pandemic, lessons from a Navy captain.
Hi, I'm Anthony Silard and welcome to the Art of Living Free. Today we're going to explore how do we get through the pandemic when there's so much anxiety around us everywhere. The people that we live with, the people we interact with, so many people, including myself often, feeling a lot of anxiety. Well, how do we deal with that? How do we interact with others? How do we even lead teams of people given this high level of anxiety? Well, to take a glimpse at how we can learn that, we're going to learn some lessons from a British Navy captain. So are you living with children? Are you living alone? Are you living with friends, with other family members, with a lot of people experiencing a lot of anxiety? It actually brings up how can we be effective leaders during this pandemic. Maybe your kids, for example, maybe they're learning online and they're home all day long. Maybe they can't go to the parks as easily as they used to. They can't go and play with sports teams because the sports teams are not getting together. You can't go as much out to restaurants or to bars or dancing or to a sports event or a concert. So how do we handle that? Well, let's go back a little over a century and take a look at British Navy exploration for some answers. So the beginning of the 20th century was an incredible time for naval exploration. A lot of former British Navy captains and lieutenants were out there trying to discover other parts of the world. For example, Robert Peary in 1909 was the first British explorer to discover the North Pole. Then, a few years later, in 1912, Robert Scott, a British naval officer, set out with his team of about 14 men to go and discover the South Pole. Well, on the way down from Britain to the South Pole, there were a lot of protests among his men saying, we don't have enough food, we don't have enough rations, we're not going to make it. And Scott was a kind of command and control type of leader and said, no, well, we're going to get there, we're going to discover the South Pole, and then we're going back to the UK. Right? So there's almost a mutiny among his men. It was a lot of tensions, right? Well, they finally did get to the South Pole, okay? And when they got there, though, unfortunately, there was a flag already there from Norway. Roald Amundsen, a famous Norwegian explorer, had discovered the South Pole 35 days earlier. On the way back to Britain, Robert Scott and all of his men perished during the journey because they did not have enough food. Then, in 1914, came another British naval officer, Ernest Shackleton. He set out with 28 men on a ship that he bought and renamed and called Endurance, and their vision was to be the first to arrive in Antarctica and then traverse the subcontinent. So, on their way down, they passed Argentina, and about 800 miles south of Argentina, their ship became pickled in an iceberg. So imagine, there they are, no land anywhere nearby, and they are stuck on an iceberg. Over the next 8 months, the iceberg dragged the ship north and finally crushed the ship, and they watched it sink to the ocean floor. And all of a sudden, there they were, there's no ship, they're on an iceberg, and what are they going to do? So Shackleton was a very different kind of leader than Scott. His idea was not to win, but what he called to win honorably and splendidly. It was about the values, how you would win. So his first priority was his men. And what he did was he attuned to the needs of each of those men. So those men who were very, could have been power grabbers, really interested in power and high egos, he knew how to flatter them. Those who became sick, he personally nursed them back to health. Those who were going to go stir crazy, what are we going to do out here on an iceberg? He developed very rigorous set times, structured times every day for recreation, for the 3 meals. Every evening there was a party where all the men came together and they They wrote and read poetry and sang together. There was, for those who were really interested in learning, they created a library in an igloo. This really happened. Like, everything was around how each of these men could reach their potential on that iceberg. So he really encouraged them each to express their needs, express what they wanted, and they were stuck on that iceberg, all of those 28 men, for 2 years. The amazing thing, it gives me chills when I think about it, every single one of those men returned to England in good physical and mental health. And this was in a time of scurvy and other diseases. Life expectancy wasn't nearly as high as it is today, right? A lot of diseases out there and viruses, and Shackleton kept all of those men alive. And when they were asked, like, how did you stay alive on an iceberg? I mean, this is in sub-freezing temperatures for over 2 years. When they were asked, like, how did you do it? How did you survive out there? They all would just share one word: Shackleton. So let's take a look at Ernest Shackleton. What about this man made him such a phenomenal leader? Well, a few things. One is that his goal of being the first to arrive in Antarctica, he was able to shift goals. And even there were other opportunities to get smaller ships and keep going. They came right back to England. He put his men first, always keeping his men first. What else about him? So on his tombstone, he was called a Viking with a mother's heart. Let's think about that for a little bit. I got to just share. I used to run an organization, and one of our board members he was actually a director of Apple Computer in India and China. And he used to say, when he wanted to hear more about something I was saying, he would say, "Let me double click on that." I mean, he wanted more. Okay, so let's double click on Ernest Shackleton and the way he grew up. So, a Viking with a mother's heart. He grew up in a very feminine household with his mother and 5 sisters. So when you think about like the way he acted toward his men, a Viking, that's the part of us that's like strong, assertive, resolute. And then with a mother's heart, that's sensitive, nurturing, empathetic, caring. He had both of those parts within him, in large part because he did grow up in a feminine household. Well, what I've seen, I've been coaching leaders for over 30 years, and what I've seen is that the most effective leaders are always able to balance empathy, meaning being empathetic, nurturing, supportive, caring, and assertiveness, being authentic about their needs and what they want for the organization. Strong, resolute, firm. So one important thing to think about in challenging times and any times, but especially during this pandemic, is trying to attune to the uniqueness of each person in your group. So there was a very interesting study by Herben van Cleef at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where in 2009. And what Herben found is that if you're a leader and you become angry, some of your team members, it's going to be a real turnoff to them, and they're not going to want to work with you if you get angry a lot. But for others, they don't mind. And why would that be? It turns out there's a psychological variable or dimension which is called agreeableness. Some people are high in agreeableness. People that are high in agreeableness, they tend to really value emotional connection with the leader and with others, harmony in the group. Well, those folks do not like angry leaders because they don't feel they have a good relationship with those leaders. Whereas there's other folks who they're not so much interested in the emotional connection with others around them. They care more about learning. Their real goal is they want to come to the organization, and they cognitively want to learn. So think about it this way. A leader makes an emotional or affective connection with some followers or team members and a cognitive connection with others. So others are around them because they feel that they can learn from the leader. So there's an interesting story that kind of illustrates this, which is there's an engineer that I used to coach, and he worked at Apple for like 12 years. And he told me after about 6 years, he was there in his cubicle, and Steve Jobs came in and looked at the work he'd been doing and said, "This is crap, stop working on it," and said it in front of a lot of people. So I asked him, I said, "So how come you worked for Steve for another 6 years after he humiliated you publicly like that?" And he said, "Well, the truth is there's no one in the industry I could have learned as much from as Steve. And so for him, it was that cognitive pathway to the leader that was important rather than the emotional. So each of us are different, and I think as a leader, it's very important to attune to the needs of each person. Another important strategy to lead in this pandemic, and again, that could be guiding people in your own household, that could be leading an organization, and everything in between. Another strategy is to recognize that the number one need that your followers or team members have, or your family members or group members, the number one need they have is for security. And they look to you as a leader to provide that. Now this stems back from attachment theory. Actually, people look to a leader, just as a child looks to a parent, to have a strong connection with that person, a strong attachment, a strong bond with that person. And so they look to you to provide this sense of security. Well, to do that, especially in a pandemic, it's very important to have a strong sense of structure for people to know. And I will say, I'm just going to have to admit this, it's ironic I teach leadership because I'm more of a servant in my own home, right? So I say here in my home, I say, when someone says, hey, would you like to go for dinner? I say, well, let me check with the government, right? The government meaning my wife. So she basically is the one who makes the rules. She has set up, we have a schedule. We have exact specific times we're having breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. I never would have done that, but I got to say, it really works during this pandemic. It's incredible because it gives everyone something that they feel they have a sense of control over. And we've got very clear roles and responsibilities about who does what. I got my chores that I'm doing, everyone else does too, the kids, and they like to feel that they're useful and they're contributing too. It brings to mind like Linda Grattan's research at London Business School of high-performing teams, and what she found was that the highest performing teams, the roles and responsibilities were very clear. So for example, the BBC covering the World Cup, there are 75 team members at the BBC, from camera people to broadcasters, to writers, producers, and everyone had a very specific role, and that's what made them so effective. So especially in a time of crisis, having very clear roles and responsibilities and structure is that much more important.
Life offers us many challenges, and theartoflivingfree.org offers new ways of thinking so we can see these challenges from a new angle and overcome them. Whether it's Anthony Silard's free blog, video or podcast series, his book, Screened In: The Art of Living Free in the Digital Age, or personalized courses, theartoflivingfree.org will help you refine your life vision and then transform it into action. Find out more at theartoflivingfree.org.